Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this ECT event titled Dealing with Precarity as an ECR, Practical Advice to Navigate Academic Transitions. And for those of you who haven't yet come across the ECT, we are the Early Career Development Group, which was created within the European International Studies Association to support the next generation of scholars. Our mission is to connect early career researchers across international studies and related fields, spark collaborative projects, and nurture leadership skills that will help shape the future of our discipline. We organized this event because as early career researchers ourselves, we're acutely aware that the career transitions in academia and research-oriented professions are often discussed in abstract terms, while the concrete realities, trade-offs, and uncertainties remain underexplored. This event is meant to create a space for a candidate experience-based conversation, one that does not offer a single model of success, but instead reflects the plurality of career paths that are available, possible, and increasingly common. For these reasons, we've brought together a panel of speakers from varied professional environments, spanning academia and policy-oriented research settings, including universities, research centers, and think tanks. They are also at different stages of their careers, from postdoctoral researchers to assistant professors and policy professionals, allowing us to reflect on both immediate post-PhD transitions and longer-term career trajectories. We are particularly eager to listen to our speaker experiences, how they navigated key professional decisions, how they dealt with structural constraints such as job insecurity and mobility expectation, and what strategies they found useful or challenging along the way. So after their introductory remarks, we very much encourage an open and interactive discussion driven by your questions. So we will open the floor after the first remarks for your questions. Let me now introduce our panelists in alphabetical order. So starting with Dr. Berlotto. She is the head of the research department at the Italy-China Council Foundation. She holds a PhD in international relations from the University of Milan. Her research focuses on China's domestic and foreign policy. She has conducted research at the National Taiwan University in Taipei and at the Renmin University of China in Beijing. And previously, she was a research fellow at SDA Bocconi School of Management and a teaching assistant at Bocconi University. Then Dr. Hand is an assistant teaching professor and assistant director at the Center for Presidential History of the Southern Methodist University. She received her PhD in public policy from the University of Texas at Austin, where she was a graduate fellow at the Clements Center for National Security. Before coming to SMU, she was a postdoctoral fellow in Duke University's Department of Political Science and a predoctoral fellow at the Henry Kissinger Center for Global Affairs at Johns Hopkins SAIS. Her first book, entitled Prioritizing Faith, was published by New York University Press in September 2025. Then we have Dr. Zhao. She is a postdoctoral researcher at Ghent University, vice head of the Marie Curie China chapter, and scientific coordinator of the Horizon Europe project, Reconnect China. Her research focuses on China's evolving role in global governance and its interactions with international organizations in a shifting global order. She also serves as an EU cost expert, a member of the EU GNOC core group, and a guest lecturer at Stanford University, Berlin, and Sichuan University. She organizes flagship events such as the Europe-China Knowledge Forum and the Europe-China Table, fostering dialogue and synergies across EU-China research consortia. Finally, Dr. Zoller is an assistant professor of history at Kennesaw State University. She was a 2019-2020 postdoctoral fellow at the Clements Center for National Security, and her research focuses on international collaboration against terrorism in the second half of the 20th century. Dr. Zoller earned a PhD in history from Temple University in 2018 and previously held the U.S. Foreign Policy and International Security postdoctoral fellowship at Dartmouth College Dickens Center for International Understanding. So thank you very much, all of our speakers, for being here with us today and for telling us a little bit more about how they navigated this difficult transition that can be from the PhD to other positions that are available after completing the PhD. So now I'm very pleased to start this conversation again in alphabetical order. So Dr. Berlotto, Sara, thanks.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm really glad also to start this discussion. So obviously I'm gonna start sharing some some personal aspects of my transitions up to the PhD. So actually I defended my PhD in early 25. So in a way also the beginning of my work was pretty recent. So in March 25. And I have to say that while I was still finishing the PhD, I started to, in a way, try to adopt a very open-minded what could be my next step. So, as you have heard, I'm not currently in academia, but I'm working for these institutions. That's it's like a combination of a foundation and a chamber of commerce. And I have to say that. There've been in a way some reasons that led me also to this kind of step because like for example I think it might be also interesting to share in the sense that while I was still doing my PhD I for example also applied for some other like teaching assistant positions or this kind of possibilities but like also in a way I discovered that one thing that for me was always a strength in the Italian university environment was perceived as a weakness in the sense that I have a bachelor degree in international relations and a master of science in economics. So this was my okay. In a way I tried to combine the two worlds. So I always thought that was interesting, but in a way I saw myself excluded from some positions, some opportunities, just because I did not had in a way correct kind of master of science in order to apply for some of these opportunities. So that this already in a way led me to realize that of course that in this moment of time there are also some in a way multiple barriers that could make staying in academia quite complex. And I have to say that while I was finishing the PhD, I tried to in a way applied also for other opportunities, but in quite unexpectedly, then there was this position as a head of a research department and. I mean, this kind of institution that obviously, since I in a way specialize in Chinese studies, was particularly interesting from my point of view. So I have to say that I applied also by saying, okay, I'm a baby, I'm not, I mean, who knows? And I went to also to the job interview very, I have to say, probably very, okay, let's try. And then I ended up being selected. And I have to say that it's been I mean, almost a year now. And what is important for me is that my daily job is still doing research because that's what I want to do. So I'm an analyst. I've started to see things from a little bit different perspective in the sense that while I was in academia was more oriented into theories and political science and IR. And here I've been used to see also the perspective of companies because, I mean, one of my topics here is obviously to let people know more about China, so about China politics and economy and this kind of stuff. But mostly, I guide Italian enterprises that do want to enter the Chinese market. So it's more business oriented. So obviously, this is something new to me since I come from from academia and I was used to completely different kind of yeah, but you know the teaching, the writing, and this kind of stuff. And I don't want to take too much time. I just finish one final remark that I mean, for the time being, is still very important for me in the sense that even though I'm currently in a way out of academia, one of the best things that also the PhD experience left me was the work with the peers, so with other colleagues, also with other PhD colleagues. So I'm still publishing. So the thing is that I haven't, in a way, told myself that this is a permanent decision. So I still want to keep that door open. And I'm still, I mean, maybe sometimes struggling, but as we are all with our jobs, but to not abandon the academia. So keep publishing, keep working with the brilliant scholars I was lucky enough to meet during, I have to say, mostly young scholars that I've met during my my path. And yeah, that's for now. But I'm also happy then to share more and wait for your questions.
Thanks. So now proceeding with Dr. Hand.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Excuse me. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate these types of venues because I think it allows us an opportunity to speak more freely about what it is actually like rather than just what our CVs look like. And so I finished my PhD a few years ago, actually in 2021 from the University of Texas. But one thing I appreciated when I was invited to share with you guys today is that there was an S on the end of transitions, that it wasn't just a transition from PhD into whatever comes next, but rather it's typically a more iterative process. That was certainly true for me. So I actually had a pre-doctoral fellowship at Johns Hopkins SAIS in Washington, D.C. starting in 2020, which, as you might recall, was not a great time to move anywhere, particularly to D.C. But it was a great way to finish out my dissertation, and then I graduated the following year before taking one predoctoral fellowship at Duke University, and then eventually taking a predoctoral fellowship at SMU, which is still my home institution. So in the last year, I was able to find kind of serendipitously, there was an opening for an assistant teaching professor at SMU, so I have a more permanent role there now, even though it didn't end up being in the tenure track space. So I'll talk a little bit about that and kind of the nature of my job now. But like Sarah mentioned, the most exciting thing to me is that I'm able to do research and I'm able to teach in my current job. So I actually feel really grateful for where I've landed. A couple of things I wanted to mention about the process and what transitions have looked like for me. And again, be very happy to answer any questions that you have. But I would like to caveat this by saying that most of the advice that I will share is advice that I did not take, but is rather advice I wish I would have taken. And so one of the most challenging things I found in making the transition from my PhD program into professional opportunities was the reality that these positions were temporary. So that a postdoc or a predoc was largely a year-long process, or maybe 2 years if you're lucky. And so there was this instinctive pressure when you landed somewhere automatically to be thinking of what came next. And that, I think, proved to be one of the most difficult parts of the process for me, is that I felt like I was almost living in two places at any given time. That it was, I was here in a new position, but I was constantly looking for what came next. And so my main advice, and I think I was able to implement this in the last couple of years, but wasn't right when I started or right when I finished the PhD, was to try to disconnect my own workflow from the job market. So in as much as possible, I really have sought to continue with my own research projects independent of how the job market is going. That is much easier said than done, because obviously the job market brings anxiety and brings stress and all of that. That's very real. But at the same time, I actually found I could adjust to that stress much better if it wasn't, if my work trajectory wasn't dependent on it. So I tried to keep my job market planning just to Mondays and Fridays. And I really set it aside Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday to do my own work. So that also added some pressure to make progress on the job market in a shorter amount of time, rather than letting it kind of become the entire job, which it can if you're not careful. Another thing on the question of temporary positions is the importance of really hitting the ground running immediately when you get somewhere. So one thing I think I was able to do at SMU but wasn't able to do at Johns Hopkins was get to know people very quickly when you arrive at a place. And I think it can be a bit awkward to make those initial introductions in very quick succession. But you'll find that maybe you've only been there a few months, but you only have a few months left. And so that was something that I wish I would have done more of in my earlier positions. And then finally, and I'll kind of say one more little piece of advice, and then I'll kick it off to the next participant. But finally, I think that remembering your priorities is a piece that we don't necessarily get from the job market or from academia, but was something that was really important to me. So sharing a bit more of my personal journey, my father became very ill when I was at Duke, and I was thinking of staying at Duke for another year because I had a really great experience at their postdoc. But this opening in Texas opened back up, and it was an opportunity for me to come closer to family and be there during an important time in my life, in my dad's life. It didn't work out. My father ended up passing away before I made the transition back to Texas, so it's a story for another time. But I think what it really did was it was a forcing mechanism for me to realize that my work was only a piece of my life. It wasn't my entire life, and that was an extreme example where it was easy to see the priority and to be able to say, of course, I'm going home to be with my father. But sometimes the priorities aren't that clear, and it can be a little bit harder to keep your priorities in check. And so I think just reevaluating constantly what's most important to you, and certainly work as a piece of that, but not the entire picture. So those were kind of some things that really helped, that I thought through and helped me in my journey from the PhD into a more permanent position. So as I mentioned, right now I'm an assistant teaching professor and an assistant director at a research center at SMU, and it is a more permanent position. I have great colleagues, which I think makes the biggest difference, and I'm able to keep doing kind of the work that I wanted to do. So it wasn't something that I set out thinking that this job even existed. Sometimes the job market is shifting and changing, and new opportunities are emerging for PhDs. And so kind of the final thing I would say is just being open to new opportunities and things looking maybe perhaps a bit different than what you expected, but still really positive. So I'll leave it at that. But I'm excited to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it is very important to sometimes remember that our lives are not only our job or our PhD. So yeah, that's definitely something to keep in mind. So Dr. Zhao, if you want to keep the conversation going.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And thank you, Sarah and Ashia. I already learned a lot from your stories and your sharing, and I feel deeply resonated. Um, I'm going to try to speak openly and honestly. I think precarity in academia isn't an individual weakness. It is a systematic structural feature of how research is funded and staffed. And for me, I got my PhD about 3 years ago, and the PhD to a postdoc transition was less a single step and more a period of structured uncertainty. And I think this system rewards high output and high mobility, but the next stable role is never guaranteed. So after my PhD, I targeted roles that would ideally grow my publication profile and international experience, and B, give me a bit of leadership or coordination experience, because I think those skills transfer both inside and outside academia. And location-wise, my main target is still Europe, including UK, and I also open to Asia and the USA. Then during the challenging navigation and transition period, I also search for some numbers to let myself know what's the reality. And then, for example, we know those famous fellowship or scholarship, like for example, the Marie Curie scholarship is about like 16% success rate. And for example, the ERC starting grant is about only around 10% success rate. So I think the transition period feels exciting, but also vulnerable, because the ladder is really steep and the funding success rate is so low. So aware of this, I try to maximize my opportunities. In this, I also quite resonated with Sarah. Also try to stay very open-minded. I built a Excel spreadsheet, and I tracked all the job opportunities, like from maybe 1 to 20, and I ranked um, the most desirable ones. Also put really highlight the application deadline, and then also track, for example, the contract period, the location, the faculty, like all the information. I think by this Excel spreadsheet that I can keep things in order, and also I also put those really important deadlines to my own calendars and set reminders, and then put the mindset to action. So I will try to like block at least 1 or ideally 2 weeks in advance to write my application proposals, prepare all the materials. So I gave myself about like 3 months of navigation period, and I think I sent out around 10 or 12 or 15 around this number of applications. Mostly back then it's still academia job, and then luckily I think I got like about six interviews and 2 offers. One is my current offer, and the other actually back then was a tenured assistant professorship, but that one is in China. Then I'm still like thinking I would like to stay in Europe for more, and then that is how I choose. Also, I still feel luckily that with this giant Horizon Europe project, I can serve both as a postdoc, as a researcher, and also do some scientific coordination work. That is like I think with a like it's a good network. Then I'm like immediately embedded in the top universities and think tanks. Then I wish I can help me to pave my next step. So I think it is a very stressful period still now, because I'm still in the temporary contract. I'm still navigating the next step. But I'm trying to keep 3 doors open. I think the first one is still the academic track, and then the second doors is the research leadership or management track. And then the third track is policy or think tank or like research related track. Like for example, in Brussels, we have so many think tanks that would also appreciate our expertise. And I also know from some of my colleagues, they also try to keep the fourth door open. For example, international organizations such as the EU, the Commission, the Parliament, or other international organizations, also like OECD, they pay really high salary. That is very good. So I think try to stay in a positive and flexible and open-minded mindedness. And I think we had already enough peer pressure, and then we also really need peer support. We need to try to encourage all ourselves, and try to pave our way. I'll stop here, and I'll be happy to answer more questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, it appears that also the place where we live and work it's really important in thinking about the PhD transition, because we usually researchers have to move a lot, and choosing the right place at the right time can be really important. So last but not least, Dr. Zoller, if you want to bring us home for the moment.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Matteo and Marianne, for organizing this. It's an honor to be here. So I'm probably one of the outliers here. I did my PhD in 2018, so it's been a little bit. At the time, we had to organize it on short notice. We were still doing it over Skype because Zoom didn't actually exist yet. So I have a master's in history from a university in Germany, Eberhard Karls University in Tübingen. And then I wanted research that was international in focus. So I applied from the beginning at a PhD at Temple University. And I was lucky there. One of the first things I did that I was very happy I did is I kept talking to people. In particular, I would seek out people who were 2, 3 years ahead of me, who had done things that I wanted to do. They'd secured a grant. They had gotten a job interview. Some of them even got job positions, job offerings. And I would talk to them. I would say, "What did you do?" And mostly they were flattered to talk to me. And that's a network I've kept up. And that was something I've been doing the whole time. And I'm going to echo a lot of what has already been said by my co-panelists. I also had a spreadsheet for every year, an Excel spreadsheet with all of the positions I wanted and deadlines and requirements. I also had sort of plan A, B, C, D going on. I did learn very early on, and I think this has also been mentioned, that it's academia, quite like no other place, equates your work with your identity. And that can be very enriching and rewarding, but it's also incredibly toxic because it ties your self-worth to your success on the job market. And the job market is so precarious that can be very bad. So when I started applying in 2017 for 2018, I applied with a piece that I was going to shop around as an article, and at the same time I was using it as my writing sample. And I got it back from Diplomatic History, and the reviewer hated it. He had trashed it. He used really personal, virulent language. And then 2 days later, I got a notification from Dartmouth Dickey Center that I had received a postdoctoral fellowship based on this article. So don't let your identity be defined by your work. There is so much luck involved. There is so much going on behind the scenes. And it's really, really important to keep those boundaries. Although you may understand that was an emotional weekend for me. So I had to defend my dissertation on short notice. And luckily, I had a committee that was willing to work with me that said, okay, it's not as fleshed out as we would like it to be, but you're going to have a postdoctoral fellowship where you'll be able to work on it for at least a year. And then when I moved into the fellowship, I kept talking to people, and it was designed to help you sort of get off the ground. So I asked everybody and their mother to look at my job materials. I asked everybody and their mother to look at my chapters. I discussed a book contracts with them. I came out of that postdoc with a book contract. And it really helped me articulate two different audiences who I was going to be. Because I've been on several search committees now for my current position, and what the committee always wants to see is a colleague. They never want an applicant, they want a colleague, right? You're supposed to be talking as though you already know the job, as though you know what you're doing. And just talking to everybody about sort of what the expectations are, I think really helped me. So that allowed me to get a postdoctoral fellowship at the Clements Center at the University of Texas at Austin, because I was able to tell them, this is where I am. This is what I still need to do. Here's how my project intersects with yours. Here's what I'm bringing to you in very clear ways. And from there, I had another round of applications, and I was able to I had, I think, 2 interviews and a single campus visit, and I was able to secure that job because, again, I was able to tell them all sorts of things. And I was able to correctly identify, okay, this is a university that my university just had received R2 status relatively recently. They want better researchers, but they don't really know what that means. So they also have a very old sort of historical teaching focus. And so when I interviewed, I was able to balance that. So drawing those clear boundaries, I think, from your work is important, and talking to as many people as possible, I think sets you up. And I'm happy to go into depth on that more. I think this just supplements what everybody else has said, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much. I see that there are already a couple of questions in the chat, but Marion, if you want to uh, deal with those.
Yeah, thank you, Matteo, and thank you to all of the four speakers. I just want to highlight how very privileged we are that the four of you took time out to speak to this group of participants. And I would like to thank you all for your openness, for actually opening up the struggles and showing some of the difficulties behind the truly impressive CVs that you all bring to the table. Without further ado, I think because we already have questions in the chat from Chloe. And so I just want to say for everybody, you're very welcome to just raise your hand, maybe turn on your video if you're able to, maybe say briefly from where you're calling in and what is your current status, so to speak. But I will start by, if you can also put your questions in the chat, of course, and I will just start by reading out Chloe's question. So the first question goes to Sarah, and Chloe is asking, can you please elaborate on how difficult you're finding it to keep publishing while doing the current full-time job? Is it something you would describe as doable, or does it feel like working 2 shifts a day? And just to make a little note here, Sarah, I look forward to your answer, but I would like to open this question up also to the other panelists, because we know that especially in the early stages of your career, you're super busy with other things, whether that be writing the next application for the next pre or postdoc fellowship, or the publish or perish kind of pressure, and maybe teaching coming in, or working in a research center and having some managerial work to do there as well. So this question actually goes primarily to Sarah, but also really to all of you, in terms of how manageable it is in the early stages of the career to keep publishing and build that publication record that you need.
Absolutely. So maybe I start, but absolutely, we in a way just put it as a question for everybody. So I also, in a way, just to answer this question, to share these two in a way experiences that I lived in the years, because before starting and deciding to start a PhD, I've worked for a few years at an Italian university, so at Bocconi University, and due to the fact that the in a way PhD scholarship obviously was not it was not enough in terms of money, because obviously this is another big issue on the table. I kept my previous job. Problem is that I was doing 2 completely different things. So in Bocconi as a researcher, I was doing research on healthcare and management, and I decided to pursue a PhD in political science. So when you talk about working 2 shifts a day, that was the time I tried to do that, but that was unsustainable. And actually, after a year and a half, I was just like, I cannot just keep on doing this. So I, of course, ended up concentrating on the PhD. So as for now, I have to say that in a way, for the time being, I'm feeling that it's feasible to keep publishing, also because I've in a way been very really lucky in my current job, and I just cite two main factors here. So I have to say that in my current job, one of the obviously things that led me to this decision is that it was not a temporary job. So this in a way brings down the real hard pressure on always, and you also already mentioned that, to feel constantly in need of searching for what's next. So I just said, okay, I need to accept it, also because I need to have a vision for my life that goes more than a year and a half. And even more importantly, I have in my current job, I have a lot of meetings, I have a lot of things that I have to do, but I have a time in which I enter the office and a time in which I leave. So in a way, my time is very fixed, and this is something very useful. I mean, very helpful also in trying to balancing this with my life, that is one another very big, as we already mentioned that, and then obviously the fact that it's not just the one job, so I can find the time also to balance with other things that I may have. One other thing I want to mention, but this is also because it was quite struggling for me while doing the PhD, is that in my current job, I'm head of research in the sense that I have two analysts, two colleagues working with me. And I have to say that every day we discuss, we monitor, we do things together. And I felt a lot alone during my PhD. So obviously, I know this may changes depending on what you do, where you are. But definitely I miss the interaction also in terms of analysis with other people so much. So probably the fact that right now I have two things combined, this creates room and also the desire to find time to pursue also my analysis, also because the two things are quite interconnected. So I do this kind of research on these topics. So what I started doing during this year was based also on the many meetings I can do with my job, also to see other perspectives, to meet a lot of people. It gives me, in a way, the material to put on some further reflections and to continue publishing. So I hope it just answered the question.
Thank you very much, Sarah. The other panelists, any ideas, maybe also advice on how to deal with the often double, triple pressures of having to keep publishing while doing all the other things that are really important at the stages of your career that you're in?
I can jump in here briefly just to say that mine has become a lot more seasonal than it used to. So I think when I was working on my PhD, I was able to, that was my primary thing, is that I was working on the dissertation, and now I do have other things. And so I've really had to get more disciplined about the seasonality of the job. So while I'm teaching, for example, I'm not doing as much research. I still like to move it along, but I kind of let myself off the hook when the semester is at its most intense period. But that also meant I took about 4 weeks in December, the end of November and December, as the semester was ramping down, to really focus on my writing. And then the same goes for January. I had several weeks to write, and I really try to protect that time. And so I think that it can be a hard switch because you're tired from the semester, or you need a break, and certainly that is a piece to work in as well. But I've become pretty militant, I would say, about protecting my writing time as I'm able, just so that the rest of the year. So I guess I'm looking at it as years instead of weeks. And I think, I had to talk about spreadsheets. We were talking about earlier, how many spreadsheets did I have going during the dissertation phase, including trying to keep up with my research output. And I used to kind of do that on a weekly or even monthly basis. And now I do it on a 6-month basis of kind of what are my goals a little bit longer term, but then being committed to those so that, a year doesn't go by where I haven't touched anything. All that to say, I finished the book in September and I haven't done much since, so I got to get back. I got to get back to the research piece now. But I think that the seasonality can be helpful, just finding periods that when things are a bit slower, where you can really focus on your work.
I think that's really helpful advice also in terms of thinking in a little bit longer time horizons. And as you also bring up, I think that's a refrain that I hear a lot. It's about setting boundaries and clearly trying to protect your space and the different priorities that you have in your life. Any further remarks to add to that question? Otherwise, I would probably move to Chloe's second question.
Maybe I can just jump in for very briefly. I think for me, it's about really let go of my wild wishful thinking that I can have it all. Because my current role is 50% at least, also do a lot of scientific coordination role. So, but always things happened during the process. So actually, I think it's at least 60 or 70%. So it really eats out the research time. And for those scientific coordination role, it's always like very urgent. So that's also adding the hustle. I was like a bit feeling that it's a bit like out of control sometimes, to be honest, especially that I could not really preserve my own writing research time. But and I know I can be crazy sometimes that I sacrifice a bit my private life, like sleep less or don't do proper social life, like yeah, just to give me myself more research time. But after a period, I just realized it's not sustainable. So I think I switched to like have it all mindset or strategy, that I try to like stay real with myself. That is, this is really what I can do and what I can get, and I make peace with it. So I don't know if this is a good mindset or advice, but I think at least it helped me to reduce my anxiety. And also I switched my mind that as long as I put my efforts to some tangible things, I learned experience, I enhanced some skills, not necessarily only build up expertise in specific research articles, but also elsewhere. Yeah, this is a little thing to add. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is a really relevant and super good comment, because I loved how you said to make peace with what's realistic and that not everything can be done. So I think especially in an environment like academia where there's this constant pressure about doing all these things, it's also important to sometimes be gentle with oneself and let oneself off the hook and say everybody is facing this kind of struggle, and it's important to just preserve a personal space and not engage in behavior that in the long run will not make you happy or will be unsustainable. Okay, let's move to Chloe's second question. This is about the researcher cooperation and peer support. And Chloe is saying, it makes me wonder if any of you has had strategies in preparing the applications that involve peer help, for example, reviewing cover letters, etc. Is this a thing, and is it desirable? Any thoughts on that?
So I think it depends on what you asked by peers, but I asked people who were very similar to who was going to be looking at the application materials to take a look and tell me, is this something that you would move forward? And I was pretty obnoxious about it. So I went to senior people. So I asked Mark Lawrence, for example, at the Clements Center. It's like, hey, can you look at my cover materials? And their feedback was absolutely invaluable.
Thanks, Silke, for that. I think that's one of the barriers. I mean, I can speak for me personally to like this is like a call for being obnoxious, right? And I think oftentimes people who are being asked are not perceiving it as obnoxious as we may think it is. So I think that's a very good advice on just really calling in, because I also remember that lots of people used to always say to me, if you have any questions, if I can help in any way, please let me know. And then sometimes there's just a lot of hesitation about, maybe they just said it and they didn't mean it or something like that.
And even if they're not willing to help you with their job materials, they might be willing to look at a piece of writing, or they might be willing to give you a hint if you notice, oh, there's a recent event, I want to write an op-ed for it. I think just being willing to make that leap is so important. I had a couple of opportunities that I didn't take to speak to people, and I still regret those.
Other thoughts on peer support, maybe other strategies that you pursued in getting help from peers or maybe even from people who are ahead of you in the career trajectory?
I really appreciate what was said earlier, that kind of switching this mentality from peer pressure to peer support as a necessary piece of kind of our work and what we do. So I would say mine is more specific to if you are in a postdoctoral fellowship or a predoctoral fellowship, that I found that the people who are, if you have a cohort, are invaluable as well, because they're doing the same thing. And I think one of the the anxiety around job materials can create a sort of paralysis where you hold on to things much longer perhaps than you need to. And I think that finding either a friend, and whether it's, I mean, I found it most helpful if you could say, hey, I'm looking for someone I'm looking to support each other on the job market. Is that something you're open to, where we could review each other's materials or practice job talks? And I've never gotten anybody who wasn't thrilled with that arrangement, that people are kind of hungry for the opportunity both to share their work but also to see yours and to go back and forth. Granted, I think that's been a bit easier for me because I've been largely in history places, but my PhD is in policy, so we weren't necessarily going for the same jobs, where I know that it can get a little bit more complicated if you're two peers that are looking at the same position. But I think especially if you find someone that maybe is slightly outside of your discipline or has a different focus, that it can be helpful to have a pair of fresh eyes and also to help you work through some of that anxiety together. Because I think if I could boil down my advice from my postdoc all in one thing, it would be to ship things much faster. I held on to things so much longer than I needed to, which really, I think, stopped my research productivity. And the job market can be a real minefield for your brain of being, I would overthink, I would have 5 letters to do, and then somehow I was reworking the same sentence 17 times. And you're like, well, let's get to those other 4, the other things that you need to do first. So I found that peer support and kind of just making friends to help with that process made it better, but also made it faster, which is important too.
I think that's an important piece of advice on the whole peer support question, and whether that's possible and feasible, is maybe to go the route that Ashlyn just mentioned. Look at people or ask people to help you that are not necessarily directly competing with you for a specific job. And I think on that, to add to that, it's maybe also important if you can be part of any networks where you regularly get together with people who are maybe not exactly in your field. That can be super helpful because you might not be directly competing. And also, as Ashlyn said, it's a fresh pair of eyes, as Silke also said that. So that it doesn't have the same blinders as we often have when we work on one question in one field. All right. Yeah, please do.
Just 2 very quick remarks on peer support. First one is when we aiming for postdoc fellowships such as Marie Curie, or for example, the famous Belgian FWO fellowship, because now I'm serving the vice head of Marie Curie China chapter, and also we have the Marie Curie chapter for the whole Europe. Actually, if you would like to have more information about how's the application going, and also maybe to have someone who already had a successful experience to help you to really help you to strengthen your application, you can contact our chapter, and we would we would love to help you. And also we do organize the webinars like this, like today. We have a lot of information sharing, experience sharing. I think that's can be some of the good source of information that you may like to know. And also the same situation also goes to the FWO application. This is one thing. And second is in my university, we have had a pre-doc or postdoc group. Then it's about a monthly peer support mechanism that you can sit together, sharing especially negative thoughts and anxieties and stress things. Then you are not alone. We are suffering together. So in this case, so maybe it's a kind of also can be helpful in a way. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Huanyu, for sharing that. I think that's also an important point to make, that peers and networks and so on are not only about asking people favors or looking at each other's materials, but also just basically talking about how difficult sometimes things are and realizing that you're not alone with these kind of things. That basically in one form or another, everybody more or less is going through the same emotions and difficulties. I would like to move on to a question posed by Sarah in the chat. Actually, it's 2 questions. She's asking, are activities such as organizing workshops and co-editing special issues positive additions to a CV? She has received contradictory advice on whether these are a waste of time or whether they are worth doing. And the second question, maybe we can take these together, is whether it's more important to secure a quick book contract with a non-university press, or is it worth going through a longer process with a university press? I see there's also a third question, but maybe we take these two and then go for the third question. So basically questions of whether it's worth to do like some extracurricular activities like organizing workshops, co-editing special issues, and then also the book piece, go with university or non-university press and the different timelines that may entail.
So I think I can speak only in disciplinary specific ways because I've had some experience in history on this, and I've been on several search committees in academia for history specifically. And the thing is always for the CV, it's always good to have that on your CV, but what is it that you are sharing? What skills are you showing? So I think what we would be looking at if I had that CV is this is somebody who is networked in their field. This is a rising scholar in their field. So that's a good thing. But also if you're applying, for example, for a tenure track position, one of the things that almost every school is going to look out for, every search committee, is this person going to be able to get tenure? Because nobody wants a failed search. We can't afford it. So we need somebody who we know is going to meet our tenure requirements. And organizing workshops and co-editing special editions can help, but it's not going to be the main thing that gets you tenure, at least not in history where you need a published book. So I think it differs among disciplines, but I think if you're applying for an academic position, there is this certain thing that it tells you this is a person who others respect, but you need more. I think for history, we like university presses. Again, it's showing like you are able to compete at the highest levels. But again, this is very, very disciplinary specific and also very specific to academia.
Maybe insights from other disciplines, political science or policy on that question, whether that things in the CV are, nice to have, so really not that important, and also on the university versus non-university press published book.
I would add in public policy the same regarding university presses, that I would certainly, I think if I would start with a university press for sure, even if it takes a bit longer, which they're notorious for taking a long time, but I think that's worth the patience there. The other question, sorry, Marian, remind me what the other piece was.
It was about, some kind of extracurricular activities like organizing workshops, that kind of piece, how that is being looked at by, let's say, search committees. And
I think I completely agree with Silke that they can be nice to do and show that you have a network and that you're invested in the field, but I don't think that it compares to publications or even teaching experience for that matter. The only caveat I would say is that at some point we do our work because we want to, because we like it. So I'm like, if it's something that you really enjoy, that you're excited about doing, then it may be worth doing just because you're making an impact and you care about the work. But if it's something that you're kind of doing reluctantly to get on your CV, I think I would encourage you instead to look more toward publication.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful advice. I think I'd also like to add to that I mean, the piece of like, is this really something you would love to do? And is it maybe a workshop or a special issue and something that's close to your heart and that you will personally benefit also from not only putting it on your CV, but, being exposed to other people who work in the same kind of topics, or, making connections, maybe through workshops. So there may be some intangible outputs of this or benefits of this that may not translate directly to, let's say, your CV, but that could help in other ways, and just like, giving you access to other people, to other networks, and so on. There is a third question that Sarah is asking, and this one is she would appreciate some insights into how realistic postdoctoral proposal topics need to be. She's repeatedly being told that most funding bodies primarily look for empirical research, often with implications. So this is for Europe-specific context, for Europe, or even when the even when the research focuses on other regions. I think that could also translate to the US context, because I think there's a lot of that going on that, it should be about US foreign policy or something. But so basically the question is, how realistic in a way should those postdoctoral proposal topics be? And how do you bring in, I guess, how do you find the sweet spot balancing the, association to, let's say, European foreign policy or US foreign policy with, regions that you are interested in or themes that you're interested in? I see some grimacing there.
I'm not sure if I can speak to this, but I can say my own topic was a little bit esoteric for the IR field, but that's where I got my postdoctoral fellowships. I was looking at extradition treaties from the 1970s that targeted terrorism. But I was able to convince enough people that that had policy relevance for the 2010s. So I think I think not the research itself, it's can you convince people of its relevance? Like how well can you make that argument? Which I'm not sure if that's helpful, but that's what I mostly found.
Some other experiences that you've had with that, and especially making this connection between the policy relevance piece, whether that be in the European or US context, and that topic, the question that you're really interested in, which in the ideal world, of course, they would neatly fit, but we know sometimes that connection is not so obvious.
Can I encourage a bit more boldness too? I actually found I had an activity that we did. I think it was my final year of my PhD at some seminar, and it was basically like take your dissertation topic or your book project and describe it in 5 different ways, as though it touches like 5 different fields. And so it wasn't changing the contribution. It was truthful. It wasn't you're making up that you're doing something that you're not doing, but it was rather using different lenses to describe what you're doing. And I found it incredibly useful because, in my head, I'm really deep in this niche subject, but then trying to say, oh, I study human rights after the Cold War. Okay, how would I talk about human rights after the Cold War? Or to say, okay, I study bureaucratic mechanisms of human rights. Okay, talk about the bureaucracy. Or I study the national security implications of human rights. Like those are 3 things that I think my book does, but they may not be the first ones that I go to talk about. And so it was useful to me to take the exact same material and just talk through how it would realistically apply to different areas. And so I think that's just building on what Silke said of it is about your translating ability. But I would say just getting some reps and practicing that to being able to translate it even into ways that feel a bit bold. Like, because I'm not it's still hard for me to be like, yeah, I'm a national security scholar. I wouldn't identify myself that way. But I do think my work has incredible implications for national security. So that's a way that I think the imposter syndrome can crowd out maybe your creativity about how your work can apply in different places. And that was a useful exercise for me in case it might be useful for someone else.
I think that's great hands-on advice on actually how to overcome the imposter syndrome and think that, hey, I'm really focused on one very specific question, just to think through what actually are the associations and the links to more broader policy questions, because usually they are there, but we would just simply not think about them, obviously. And I like that call for boldness, definitely. Support that, second that. We have a question coming from Vincent, who is asking, so it's specifically a question for the IR field, and he's saying the current environment of IR discussion is dominated by security, geopolitics, and artificial intelligence. However, his own research interests are more in historical and cultural approaches. Welcome to the club. This makes myself difficult to find positions, and I'm not really confident to boast my profile with those I am not familiar with. And also then he's asking, may I kindly ask how many applications you send out till you received your first interview or job?
You're going to make us pull out the spreadsheets again.
So I
If I
think I
can
said,
just, sorry, if I can just connect with what Vincent was saying, yeah, that resonates with another question I had, because when Sarah was talking, she said that she went into her interview for when she later was accepted for the job a little bit shaky or not very confident. So um, I think it's really important also to be um, a little bit more confident, as Ashlyn was saying before, a little bit more bold when we are applying for those kind of jobs or interviews. And then, as was saying when you before, sometimes maybe you send out a lot of job applications, and then you receive some interviews offers, but of course the interview offers are being less than the job application sent, and then you receive offers for even less position that you interviewed for. So that can be a little bit um, depressing maybe sometimes. So yeah, it was a very interesting topic for me as well.
So maybe if I can jump in a little bit on this, and then I'm also very curious to know your point on this, in the sense that in a way I found myself in a similar position, in the sense that what happens, I'm obviously referring to AR because this is the field I know more, but it happens that like for some years you have some particular fields that are under the radar, and so there are so many positions for that. While, for example, in my case, I found out that while I was finishing my PhD, even though in some ways could be counterintuitive, but in Italy at the time there were not a lot of opportunities for China, for Chinese studies. So I also found myself in maybe thinking, and in other cases applying for, in a way, IR related kind of topics that do not necessarily feel like I was confident with those topics. So in a way, my final choice also was induced by the fact that even though I knew that some of the works was particularly distant from what I had in mind, so still being in academia and stuff, the core activities were my topic. So I felt that that thing was very crucial. Don't want too much into this, but as a person trying to, also understand and analyze and talk about China, one of the things that for me was crucial, it was to have the opportunity to go to China as many times as I can. So this is a way, is one thing that my work allows me, because if you, I don't know, you maybe there are 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and you feel a completely different things that are evolving very rapidly. So in a way, I felt like I wanted to put the topic or similarity of the topic in a way before maybe staying at university, but at the cost of doing something that was too much distant from my not only interest but also my background, right? So yeah.
Any other thoughts about that? And I'm also particularly interested in that question that Vincent asked in terms of how do you fit, or do you have to fit with the big issues that are out there that everybody's talking about, that AI is going to change everything, and all we have to do is, talk about the implications of AI for global security? Or how do you navigate that if you feel that your topic that you're really burning for, that you really love, is not exactly what's the flavor of the month?
I think you have to be your own best advocate. You have to become confident enough to sell yourself, and imposter syndrome is so real. But the more you do, the more evidence you have against it. And I think I think that's non-negotiable. You have to be sort of the person who, whether you're interviewing or just talks to people, is confident enough in their own work to be able to share it. So I think building that confidence is key, and maybe speaking to peers or having like a friend who works with you on that to start building that and to start thinking about here's how I present myself better is an important thing because that confidence is going to be needed as you move on in your career. So in my position, I just submitted my tenure portfolio and I had to write a 12-page letter about how awesome I am and why I deserve tenure. So that argument is going to keep going as you go up through your career. So I think imposter syndrome is very much there, and I think we all feel it. And like what has helped me is the idea that everybody has it, and we're all just trying to get past it.
I think that's a very good point.
This
I would
is
like, yeah,
Oh,
Ashley.
sorry, Marian. I was just going to say that this is also where having friends outside of academia is so useful because, I was at a dinner party not too long ago and one of my friends was describing my work and she was like, yeah, she's a historian of American foreign policy since World War II. And I was like, no, 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 no. I don't start until, I started correcting her. And she was like, you know more about World War II than anybody at this table. And I was like, that actually might be true because she's a cardiologist and knows a lot more about the heart than I ever will. But I think that just goes to show, too, that getting outside of academia can be helpful to overcome some of that imposter syndrome. I did want to follow up, and I don't know if this is encouraging or discouraging, on the question about the number of applications versus like when you got interviews. My first year, I think I sent out dozens, and I think I got 2 interviews. And then the next year, I only sent out 6 and I got 4 interviews. And I think that was totally luck. Like I don't actually think I was that much of a better candidate the second year than I was the first. I was a more targeted search in that way. And so, but I don't think that either is the wrong approach. I think you have to decide, I don't remember who was speaking earlier about the spreadsheet with their rankings of where you would actually want to go. I think revisiting that to say, like, would I actually be willing to go there? Or, like, is this interesting enough to me is one that's worth doing because I realize even if I look back now and I did pull it up, like my spreadsheet from 2020, I don't know that I would have wanted half of the jobs I applied for, which is good because they didn't offer them to me. But just a note that sometimes it takes a lot of swings in order to get a hit, and there's that can be discouraging. But I also think it can depressurize any one application rather than going in and being like, oh, I really want this job. It's like, no, I'm putting myself out there. Here's 6 jobs I would really like. I'm applying to 20 or whatever it is. But I know that takes a lot of time, so I don't want to be flippant about the amount of work that goes into that many applications because I know it's a lot. But I think either approach makes sense.
Ashlyn did get out her spreadsheet again. I want to hook on to something that you said regarding the target, the level of targeting that you do. And I think that there is maybe a danger, especially as we always keep hearing how precarious the job market is and how difficult it is a job to basically shoot at everything that moves in a way, to make a bad metaphor, right? And that costs a lot of time and is also disheartening because oftentimes I think it's just when the fit is not there. That's not to say that there's not a lot of, luck and other things involved, but if the fit is not there, I think we have a harder start to get even the foot in the door. And so maybe it is where sometimes taking a step back also in a way to be more targeted and not let the idea that it's so hard to get a job get the better of us and try to apply to everything. I don't see a question in the chat right now, but I would like to ask you something also about mentoring. So basically the point about, very often the PhD students, candidates are being told what you really need is like a good mentor who opens doors for you and who, prevents you from making the big mistakes that you shouldn't be making. So I would want to ask you, did you have mentors or like people that you would refer to as mentors? And if so, how did you find them?
So I think your first point of contact is always your dissertation advisor and their field of networks. Like who do they know? Who do they introduce you to at conferences? I do know in my postdocs, I was specifically assigned a mentor every time. And that was incredible. They wrote letters of recommendations for me. They could speak very specifically to what I was doing because I met with them quite frequently. And then at Austin, I wound up working with somebody who was not officially my mentor, but who was good drinking friends with my advisor. And he gave me so much feedback on my book that just made it so much better. So I think what also helps is like, do not underestimate the conference drinking. That builds up really important networks. Or I'm sorry if people don't drink, the socializing, let's put it that way.
Coffee, drinks, whatever floats the boat, right? I think that's also I like that point about the drinking buddy of your advisor, because there's just this amount of serendipity, right? That maybe the mentor is not the person who is your PhD advisor or like the assigned mentor in a fellowship, but somebody that you just really identify like similar research interests or other connections that you have. That could be really an important mentor. Sarah.
Yeah, I have to say that I mean, obviously, I completely agree in the sense that also in my case, my in a way PhD supervisor was in a way a true point of reference. I know that sometimes this kind of relationship could end up being extremely complicated, and so this was a very important part, together with the fact that, for example, it was very active in enabling 2 visiting periods I did during my PhD. Sort of Matteo is now in Canberra and doing his, but for me, these were 2 very crucial moments of my PhD where I found, even in a way unexpectedly, some people's with become from that moment on true mentors in my in doing research in general, because they have been there, so the exchange I had with them was very intense and very important. I still keep in contact with them, so that was very crucial.
Thanks, Sarah. And I it's good to know that that you keep in touch with them, and so there is something that goes on, and it's not only like a temporal mentor relationship, but it's actually you meet people along the way that you will stick with in a sense for a long period.
Exactly. And if I can add, actually, I mean, in my first reaction, also when I started my job was like, okay, in a way I have to say to them and communicate that I'm now taking away a kind of a different path. But at the end, actually, it was, I mean, now I'm creating occasions with them. So, for example, I'm doing like with my job, we're doing this kind of China wrapper that is something very different from a like a scholar publications. But for example, I engage them with a comment as scholars. So I've organized some events in which they talk. So in a way, you still can keep contact with them in a different way, obviously. But I think it's still good.
Yeah. I'm being mindful of the time, and I see that Ashlyn, sorry.
Oh, no. Very brief. I was going to say also that on how do you find them, that question, I also just found that I had to ask more abruptly. Back to that boldness question that comes a bit, it doesn't come easily for me, but especially if there was like an area where I needed help, being able to tell my dissertation advisor, like, hey, could you connect me with anyone that you know that studies religion in Vietnam, for example? Because he didn't know that I didn't have any connections there, but I didn't know the language, and so it was a bit of a barrier for me. And immediately he was like, oh, yeah, there's these 7 people. And then he sent one email, and that's all he did. But then 2 of them connected with me, and one of them I still talk to. So it was like just asking specific help rather than just being like, I need a mentor, but be like, hey, I'm interested in learning more about this. Do you have a connection that might be helpful? Allows them to make connections easily without much of a mental load on their end.
I think that's a super helpful point, not only in terms of like dealing with your mentor or like looking for a mentor, but in general, if like dissertation committee or other people that you're working with or that you're colleagues with, to have specific asks and, point, or like even tell them specifically what you're working on can sometimes just open doors without too much of an effort on each side. and just overcoming that barrier, saying that I actually want to ask for help, because that could really like ease my workload as well. That's I think very important. There is another question from Vincent here, because I was just going to say, anybody who would like to ask a question, we're running up towards the scheduled end time of the event. So this is the time to put them in the chat or raise your hand. But I will read out Vincent's question. He's saying, thank you for all the comments and encouragements. However, it might be more realistic to show confidence on the interview stage. At the document screening stage, the CV and motivation letters might already show I'm not in the field and cannot compete against other candidates who are really in those AI, geopolitics, or policy fields. So this is still a question about not working on the buzzword topics that are going around. And so basically, how do you get to that interview stage where you can show the confidence? Like, how do you basically overcome the first barrier of your, proposal, CV, motivation letter immediately goes to the pile of not working on something that we're interested in? And I think I might want to make this question a bit wider also, because that I think also applies to specific postdoc fellowships that are looking for maybe very specific topics. And how do you bridge that basically and give your own letter, your own project proposal a chance of getting into the closer selection? Have any advice on those?
I think the only advice I would offer there is back to the targeting of the search. And so I think you're right. Like if they want specifically somebody that does AI and you don't do AI and you're not interested in learning, like becoming an AI scholar, then no, you're not a good fit and you wouldn't enjoy it. Like, that they would be asking you to do something that you didn't want to do anyway. And so I wonder if they're specifically looking for AI or, I think my only question here is that you put in the thing AI geopolitics or AI field. AI, that's one thing, specifically technology related. Geopolitics, though, that's a good example of something that I don't know what you work on in particular, but if it's IR related, I have a feeling it has a geopolitical impact. And so I do think that you could reframe, and still being honest about your project being geopolitical in nature, having some competition angle to it. So that's where you could be flexible. But yeah, if they're looking for something really specific, I would say it's not a job worth spending your time on, because even if you were to get it, you wouldn't be able to do what you want to work on. And so I don't know if that's incredibly helpful, but I would say separating, some of those buzzwords are very specific that you wouldn't in good conscience be able to say that you have expertise in, but there are others where I feel like you can reframe some of what you do, even in the CV and application material, to where it could capture a broader view of your work that then might push you to the interview stage. So
yeah, I think I would like to second what Ashlyn just said, and just going back, Vincent, also to the previous question that you put in the comment and where you mentioned that you're working more on historical and cultural angles. I think that here the targeting is particularly important because not all institutions will consider a scholar who is more interested in those things. There are definitely institutions that would look more for like a realpolitik kind of person. But there are also institutions that specifically look for, the more cultural approaches, the more, sociological approaches to international relations. And I think it might just be worthwhile in the interest of targeting to look at those and to specifically tailor your job search also, or postdoc or whatever fellowship search you're currently involved in, to those institutions that just give you a better shot of like clearing that first hurdle, because people will say, this is actually a scholar who's interested in. I think that we hear a whole lot of stuff about AI, but I don't think it's true that, all institutions are only looking for people who work on like technical or like super realpolitik type of things. It's a matter of search, and maybe the field is a bit smaller right now, but at the same time, I think that there are opportunities depending on geographically where you're looking and what institutions you're interested in. All right. Before we wrap this up, I would just like, first of all, to say thank you again for all of you making time for this, for all the participants, for your interesting question, and for making this so interactive. Okay, there's another. Okay. and also for actually ESA office to host us and to support this event logistically. To wrap this up, I would just like to get a very brief comment from you, if you can, from each of the speakers about, we hear so much about precarity in the field, how difficult it is to get a job. And I would like to ask you, from the position you're at now, what is it that gives you hope for the field and for job opportunities, whether that be in the academic or non-academic sector, for people who are working broadly in the field of international politics, international history? Any hopeful signs?
I can start us off. I would say that I think that the vision of success is expanding in a way that I think is really liberating for people doing this type of work. That I think that I'm seeing, at least from even tenure track and senior people, being a lot more open to what different impactful jobs could be. And I think that that's long overdue, but it gives me hope that not only will students be more prepared for multiple jobs and like options, but also that maybe the field is waking up a bit to the realities on the ground. So I think that the future in that regard is looking brighter, that there will be more opportunities and that success can look a lot of different ways.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Other comments? Final thoughts?
Okay, if I may, I think I would like to share like external prospects and internal prospect. Externally, I think we are really living in the uncertainty and also in interesting period of time. There are so many crises, so many conflicts, and that is why we, as the scholar or scholar to be in this field, would have our external needed demand. So this is the object reality. So I think we should bear it in mind that what we build up in the process of expertise is needed through the world. And because of all those crises and uncertainties, the peace and knowledge are ever more important. Yeah, so this is the first thing, external positivity in the sense of the supply and demand ratio. And then internally, I think because we are paved our way, and I think we need to be gentle to ourselves in this system and give ourselves more credits, because it is challenging and difficult, even sometimes toxic, but we are still fighting. It shows we are brave, full of perseverance and resilience. So I think we'd better give ourselves more credits and treat ourselves nicely. Yeah.
I think that is a wonderful note to end it on, because I also think it is important to say that whoever is in the last stages of the PhD program has defended a dissertation, has put publications, etc., or is in the way of having all these things. This is already a big achievement, and it's so easy to talk ourselves down and say, well, there's all these other people and they have achieved so much more. But it's also important, just like when you said, to be gentle to ourselves and look at the achievements we have made and celebrate the successes also, whatever they may be. So on that note, seeing that there are no further questions, I would like to so much thank all of you for having participated, either as panelists or as audience, and as questioners and commenters. Thank you very much. Just to remind you, this was an event of the Early Career Development Group of the European International Studies Association. You can follow us on LinkedIn or on Blue Sky and keep abreast of the events we are going to have in the following months. And with that, all I have left to say is to wish you all a wonderful evening and hope to welcome you again on our future events. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you,
you.
Mario.
Bye.
Thank you, Madele. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Silke. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you all.
And thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.